just wanted to empower people to live their best life, and sometimes removing those blocks and those triggers and those problems that we don't even realise sometimes how much they're affecting us and holding us back. Sometimes with counselling, I find talking about a problem and going into the problem just creates the problem bigger. Unless you get to a point where there's some suggestions for some solutions or some kind of understanding that comes out of it. And you don't always get to that point.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Roundtable. My name is Tar, the host of this podcast show. And in today's episode, my special guest joining me today will share insights and educate us to get a better understanding of the different therapy treatments to help improve our own mental and physical well-being. So please stick around to hear more about what we get to talk about, as this session really turned out to be a masterclass. So you know the drill, let's get to it. Hey guys, welcome back to the Roundtable. Today I'm here at the beautiful residence of my special guest joining me today at the Roundtable, Debra Mielke. But before we get into her story, as always, the Roundtable symbolizes a safe space where stories are shared, voices heard, and lessons learnt. So please pull up a seat and join me on the journey, because every story you hear matters. Debra, welcome to the Roundtable.
Thank you. I feel really blessed to be here with you today and sharing this experience.
And I'm honoured too to have this opportunity to hear from you and learn a little bit more about what you do, so others can kind of actually get educated about the work that you do too.
Well, mine's been a little bit of a journey to get to where I am. I initially went to university and studied business, law, accounting, economics, that sort of thing. And then I worked in offshore oil industry for a long time, got married, had children, and then unfortunately our marriage didn't stick. He was stepping outside the marriage a little bit, so I found that I had to move on. And from then, what I really did is I sat down and I looked at my life and the fact that I was now a single mother with children, and I thought, what can I do that I love? Because if you do what you love, you'll never work another day in your life. And how can I earn a decent income and support my children, but in such a way that I can be home for them when they come home from school and that kind of thing. So that was really important to my values as well. So I ended up, I ran a 24-hour service station for a while after I separated from my husband, and I doubled the turnover inside of 12 months and then had a little holiday, did all that soul searching, and I settled on becoming a remedial massage therapist, because I knew it was a good hourly rate and that I could pick up the children from school. And then actually what I used to do is I might then put them to bed and have some ladies that work corporate and work 9 to 5 come over for a 6 or 7 o'clock appointment or even later, so that they can, get their families settled. The kids are in bed, they can come over for a treatment at 7 or 8 and then, go home to bed.
I'll circle back to that. But before we kind of continue on, just for the listeners and the viewers that may not know who you are, could you just share a little bit about yourself, your background, where you came from, and what was it like growing up? And was it what you went through that pushed you to become the person that you are today, and the work that you do in what you do?
Definitely, because I grew up on a farm, on a 1,300-acre sheep and cattle farm. And so 4 children. I was the only girl. So I have 3 brothers, 3 amazing brothers. And it was a tough upbringing in some ways, because we worked hard and our father was, quite explosive. And sometimes if you weren't in the right place at the right time when we were working together, he would get really angry and lash out. So that was a little bit of a common occurrence, I guess. And for me, that affected my self-esteem quite a bit. So I had quite a bit of work to do when I left home to, build myself. It did do a little bit of damage, I think.
How did you find that kind of work that you needed to do to work on?
Well, initially, actually, I came across Louise Hay. And it was a book called You Can Heal Your Life. And that talked very much about not blaming your parents and forgiving your parents and all these kinds of things. So that was the first step towards my healing journey. And I think also too, before I left home, I was starting to confront my father a little bit. I remember one time I was working with him in the yards, and we had a young horse that I was working with, and I was lunging this horse, and with a young horse you would never drop the rein.
When you say lunging, what do you mean?
Lunging, so getting them to trot and canter around in a circle in the yard. So he started to give me some verbal abuse because I wasn't doing it the way that he would if he was doing that job. And I dropped that rein and I walked across that yard and I eyeballed him through the fence, and I said to him, would you speak to your friend Sue Lind if she was in this yard doing this job with this horse like that? And he looked at the ground and he shuffled his feet in the dust and he went, well, no. And I said, well, then why do you speak to me with such disrespect and disregard? I know that you could do better if this was a friend, and I'm your daughter. So you should do a lot better. And I went back to what I was doing. So we had those kinds of situations when I was growing up where I started to jack up and I started to see him for who he was, not as my father, but as a man, you know, and as a damaged man in some ways that never actually got therapy or help or anything like that.
Where was your mother in the picture?
Mum was amazing, very supportive, and was always the one that would swoop in afterwards if you were upset or hurting and be like, you know, there, Dad's just angry or whatever. And she believed in showing a united front as well. So, you know, if we were working with sheep or cattle or something like that in the stockyards and Dad got angry with us, she would never say anything. But afterwards she would say to him, hey, I think you were a little bit harsh on the kids there, you know.
Do you think it was because maybe he wanted to just prepare you guys for the world of what was to come, or?
Perhaps there was an element of that in it. And I acknowledge as well with my father that his father was an alcoholic and was abusive, physically and verbally, and he vowed and declared that he would never lay a hand on us in anger. And so he broke that pattern. He never did physically abuse us. So I respect and admire him for that. So I've then worked on myself to break the next chain in that link and not verbally abuse my children. So, and you know, that took a bit of work because that was my conditioning and my patterning. So after my divorce and I started doing massage, I found that I had lots of people coming across my table, my massage table, with problems and issues. And as part of offloading the physical stress with the body work, they would also talk about the emotional stress. And I was always that kid at school that people would come and talk to about their problems. In fact, my father used to say to me, why are you such a bleeding heart for everybody that wants to come and offload all their stuff? You shouldn't do this, you know, you get too loaded up. But I loved it. I loved being that compassionate person that could listen and you know, maybe help them to find a solution. So then I got qualified in neurolinguistic programming and then clinical hypnotherapy. And part of that was a process called timeline therapy, which I use quite a lot for people that have had trauma and PTSD and that kind of thing, because it's a very safe way to be able to process that trauma. And so a lot of my clients tend to come from, you know, doing massages and talking and building that rapport and that trust. And then often they become therapy clients after that, which is really lovely.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So where did Empowered to Accelerate come from?
So that concept was born out of my desire to help people to excel in their life, whether it be to, you know, remove some kind of physical pain or allow them to have full range of motion back, because I deal with a lot of elite level athletes and things like that. And quite often when I was living in Melbourne, I was doing a lot of combination therapy where I would do a massage and treat the body, and then we would flow into a deep hypnotherapy. And whilst they were already relaxed from the massage, talking them through relaxing each part of their body and putting them into that nice trance state was next level and much easier to achieve.
Well, okay. Before you go into more details about that, for someone that doesn't know what that is, how do you explain something to them or educate them to understand, some of the different areas that you work on, which is a massage therapist industry, is it?
Yeah, so as a remedial massage therapist, then I might work on whatever tension the body is holding, and that's where I often will get clues. So, for instance, if someone has a sore lower back, often that indicates that they're stressing about their finances. So their predominant thought patterns might be around money and not necessarily a lack of money. It might actually be that they're obsessing over what investment to make or what house to buy or whatever it might be. And tension in the shoulders, loading yourself up with problems and issues and things that you have to do. So I
think
might...
I've got one of those.
You do. Most people do. I think I even do that. So, for someone like that, I might even just help them to change their language from, I've got to do this, I need to get that done, I have to finish this, to, it'd be nice if I finished that. I'd like to complete that task. So going from a modal operator of necessity, I have to, I've got to, I need to, pressure, to a modal operator of possibility.
When you say a modal, what is that?
A mode of thinking, a modal operator. It's an NLP term.
Okay.
So going to that mode of possibility of I'd like to and I want to and I'd feel good if I completed that. Doesn't that feel softer when you try that on?
Instead of, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do that.
So sometimes it's the mental stress that we're loading ourselves up with that creates that tension. And even just learning to soften your language, you're still getting the same outcome, but you're doing it in a more positive way. And there's less tension involved in that.
Okay. So let's just break down the different areas that we work on. So we've got remedial. Do you have just a normal?
So that's the body part. And then when I'm dealing with the mental part, the mind controls the body, right?
Yes.
So that's where I get some of my tip-offs when I'm doing the massage treatment. And then when I'm doing, say, hypnotherapy or timeline therapy or something like that, so we have a conscious mind and then we have a subconscious mind. So imagine that your mind is like a computer and your conscious mind is a Word document. And then you're looking at some words on that Word document. You're not looking at the whole thing, but you're focusing on a certain amount of that with your conscious mind. But what's going on in the hard drive of that computer for you to even see that Word document?
100 other things, maybe?
Yeah, you've got Windows operating system, you've got, Microsoft Office, and you've
Excel.
Yeah. So you've got all of these programs that are loaded onto the computer that come together that allow you to even focus on that Word document. So think of that hard drive as your subconscious mind. It stores all of your memories, all of your experiences. And a lot of the time when we have experiences, there's things that get anchored into our nervous system. Or sometimes I might deal with people who, like my father, who didn't get therapy, unfortunately, might have an angry reaction to something, right? But he's not responding to us. He's reacting to something from the past. So with doing hypnotherapy or timeline therapy, once you get into that subconscious mind and where all those memories are stored and you start processing those, once something is processed and you've picked up the learning that you need from it, you don't have the reaction anymore. And the same kind of trigger can happen and you will respond to it in a very different way, in a very calm way.
Wow. We need to get a lot more of those educated systems out there to help others that are
struggling in life. And not aware of what's going on in their subconscious mind. And a lot of people don't even want to go back there and look at that So there's two things in a situation like that. With hypnotherapy, I may make suggestions that if someone has a repressed memory, that the subconscious mind is repressing that memory for a reason, for protection. And the subconscious mind will only represent a memory when it knows it's safe to do so and that the person is in a supportive environment sufficiently to be able to process that memory. Otherwise, it keeps it suppressed. So I may make suggestions, keep it there, but we can still pick up the learnings that we need.
Yep.
And with timeline therapy, sometimes I have clients that come into my clinic and, you know, my heart goes out to them because they've spent money and they've gone to, you know, counselling or therapists or whatever. And sometimes they've sat around a table and they've talked about their problems and they've gone back into that memory and they've reactivated all of those negative feelings and brought everything back up. And that can be a great way to process things if it comes to fruition and it comes to completion. But say they don't finish the therapy, or for whatever reason they don't get along with the therapist, or they're just not great at what they do, and you don't get the learnings and the understandings, all you've done is gone back in and reactivated and driven that groove deeper. It's like water that flows along a river. If you keep thinking the same thoughts and the same patterns, that groove gets deeper and deeper and deeper and harder to change.
Wow.
It's very patterned and conditioned in. So with timeline therapy, so the first thing is, in hypnotherapy, we allow a suppressed memory to stay repressed if necessary. And the other way is with timeline therapy, what you get the person to do is to imagine floating up out of their body, going back along their timeline to where a memory or an incident, a significant event occurred. And you get them to float back to a safe position where they're looking down on that event. They're not in the event, they're not remembering it, looking at it through their own eyes, feeling the feelings. They're dissociated, they're up from it, they're away from it. So it kind of keeps their mind in a safer position than going back into the memory and having to rehash it all. Oh, how did you feel when that happened? I don't want to feel that again. So let's float up and float back. So all you ask the subconscious mind to do is to pick up the learnings that it needs in order to let go of the negative emotion on whatever event you're working on. So let's say the emotion is fear, anger, sadness, whatever it is. Then you ask the subconscious mind, what do I need to learn from this event? The learnings of which will allow me to let go of those negative emotions on that event. Once you've picked up the learnings that you need, you don't need the negative emotion anymore. Once they've picked up sufficient learnings, I'll ask them to drop down into the event, looking through their own eyes, see what you saw, hear what you heard. Can you access those feelings of sadness anymore, or are they gone now on that event? And once they've picked up sufficient learnings, and they tell me that they're looking through their own eyes, and sometimes even you'll find a moment in the therapy when they're picking up their learnings where they have a bit of a giggle.
Wow.
And it's like this aha moment, and I know, got it, they've got it. This is it, you know? And then once there's sufficient learnings, then you can ask them to float back along their timeline and drop in on any other events and pick up any learnings from any other events. And they start to come through more rapidly. And I'm writing all this stuff down, right, as they're doing the timeline work. And then they eventually get back towards now. And then what I do is I future pace them. Imagine a scenario where this and this and this happened, which is a similar trigger. And what happens? Oh, well, I would just say this, or I would just do that, or it'd just be water off a duck's back. So they're not reacting anymore, they're not triggered anymore, they've dealt with it. All a trigger is a tip-off that we've got work to do. So if someone triggers me in my life, I go, thank you. Now I know what I need to work on.
So it's more of a tool to help raise that awareness within what you're dealing with in your conscious mind.
It helps you to actually process it because all those memories are stored in there. We're not even aware of them. We're not thinking of those old experiences when we react to an external trigger of what someone says to us. So we go back, we process it, then you don't get triggered in the future. So it's very effective in terms of being able to process trauma and things that are difficult to remember and hash out, because you're doing it from this safe place. Remember, you sort of up out of the event, or you can have them look at it like a movie, and that's quite effective as well, you know, whatever works for someone's mind. So then after they've picked up all these learnings, then I might drop them into a nice trance state with a nice hypnotherapy, and then I will reiterate those suggestions, and I may even create a story of how they behave differently in their future, and we pattern that new information in and let go of old stuff and make some very powerful suggestions for them to let go of the old baggage.
So how long does such a therapy take for someone dealing with their own traumatic events of what they've experienced?
How long's a piece of string? It depends on what the topic is, what the situation is, how deeply ingrained, how well the person responds to the therapy, their ability to imagine and float up and float back and follow those instructions. Yeah, it's all relative. Often it's one session for a one issue. Sometimes you need a series of sessions. It completely depends on the situation.
What's one of the most magical moments for you that you've seen, or is there one in particular that you've seen someone who's just...
There is. Straight away, as soon as you asked me that, someone popped into my mind. And that was somebody that I met who was at the time a security guard, married with a child, and had been abused physically, emotionally, sexually by his mother. And, you know, you could kind of see it on this person. To me, as a therapist, he wore it like a coat. You know, I could see. So initially I did massage, and what I found was when I was doing treatment, you know when a fly lands on a horse and they can quiver a certain muscle in their body independently?
Oh, right.
You
No,
ever
I
seen
didn't know that. No.
So horses have this amazing control over their skin. And if a fly lands on them somewhere, they can just quiver that part of their body to get rid of it. They're very sensitive. Human beings can't do that. This guy could. If you were to touch him in a certain place, because, like on his back, because of the trauma, his body would quiver.
Oh, wow.
So basically with doing a little bit of work and developing some trust, and I was very careful to explain everything that I was doing as I was doing a massage treatment. So I'm just going to expose this leg so we can do your hamstring. There's going to be a line there. I'm going to tuck it here. This towel's secure. I won't be massaging under the towel. So things like that, creating boundaries and building that trust with that client. And then about, you know, a few sessions in, next thing, we got, I think, 40 minutes into a 1 hour massage and not one quiver.
Oh, wow.
Which means that in the future, he can be intimate with his wife and do things that he wasn't able to do before without repercussions because of the trauma that he'd suffered as a child. And that, to me, was having that moment of realizing this has really calmed down, his nervous system is healing, was very special, very beautiful.
Okay, so what was the inspiration behind what you got into with this massage therapy? Also, what's like what are some of the steps? So a massage is it involves just laying on the bed thing.
Yes.
We do your workout. NLP and the time
Timeline therapy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that mean you just you do the same thing? You're on a bed, or do you sit down? How does that all
You
work?
can do that seated. You can do that online. That's virtually a conversational.
Oh, okay.
Perhaps the client might want to close their eyes though, because it's easier to imagine floating back along your timeline and describing a situation. And here's another key with timeline therapy that I really love about it is that you don't get into the story. You don't get into the details, the he said, she said.
All right. Yeah.
None of that. You just describe the situation and what was happening briefly. But you don't get into your story. You pick up the learnings. That's what you go there for. Only that. And then with NLP and timeline therapy and those kinds of things, I guess my inspiration for doing that was because I just found I had so many people coming across my massage table with problems and issues. And as a massage therapist, that's not in my wheelhouse. You're not supposed to give advice or therapy or make suggestions or anything like that if you're not qualified, obviously. So now I'm like a tour guide where someone has a problem and I help them to find a solution. I never tell them what to do or give them advice, but I ask good quality questions to lead them to make their own conclusion and their own decisions and create outcomes that are workable for them.
Maybe you need your own podcast show.
You never know.
Okay. And the birth of Empowered to Accelerate, like that's a cool looking name. Like, did you ever think about like shortening it to like E2E or something, or and how did you come up with that?
Well, I really just wanted to empower people to live their best life, you know, and sometimes removing those blocks and those triggers and those problems that we don't even realize sometimes how much they're affecting us and holding us back. And so many people walk out of my clinic feeling lighter, whether it's from a massage, obviously, but, you know, from therapy as well, when they've really resolved something and understood why they had that experience, you know. So for me, I see it as we're a human soul that's come down onto this planet. We're in this body for this lifetime, no matter whatever you believe in reincarnation or whatever it is. But the purpose is for our soul to evolve. And so I guess that's what I help people do, is to evolve through their lessons in life. And sometimes we get stuck.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't want to look back there because it's too painful.
Is that what we should be doing?
If we want to be empowered and whole and complete as a person and uninhibited and joyful and free, absolutely we should. It's a personal choice, of course.
Yeah.
And I just find that timeline therapy is a less intrusive, safer way to do it because you're not getting into the story. I've had lawyers that I deal with that have had pretty gnarly cases that they actually can't divulge what's going on in a case, but they really need to get their head straight to be able to deal with it. You know, and sometimes they have to look at pictures of someone who raped and stabbed and murdered their wife. You know, it can be horrific. And especially when children are involved and they've got kids of their own, you know. So dealing with people like that with timeline therapy where they don't have to get into the story and they just simply pick up the learnings that they need to get rid of whatever emotion it is that they're experiencing from that, having to be exposed to that. Like, I just feel disgusted by this person, or I just feel so sad for this person, or whatever it might be.
So yeah, it really does sound like the learnings or educating people about these things that they're going through, seeing it in a different light.
Yes, if you change the way you look at something, the thing you look at changes. And it's not often that we hold space to be able to process our issues and our traumas, if you like.
Have you ever had cases or clients that were really difficult to help
Yes.
at a point where it's like, you were mentally drained from that experience? I mean, if that's ever possible.
Potentially a little frustrated with one particular client who was super, super intelligent. And I actually thought that the therapy would go really well because of that. However, I think this client was just so invested. And sometimes people have a lot of side benefits out of having a problem,
Oh, okay.
if that makes sense. So
Like there's
for
a need for.
instance, a side benefit might be that I don't get along with my family and I've disengaged from them. I don't want to process all of the stuff I went through with them. It's too traumatic and hurtful. So, if they did process that, then, they wouldn't be able to talk about their family like that and have the whole poor me thing going on.
So it's like their own secret that they still don't want to share, or maybe.
Or imagine, with a lot of elderly people, they'll sit around, oh, I've got a really achy back today. Oh, that's nothing. My knees are on fire,
Hopefully I get to that point where I can do something like that.
But what are they getting from sharing?
Hey guys, thanks again for tuning back into the Roundtable. And look, if you're finding value in today's show, please hit that like button, share and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to reach out to other individuals and organizations that are making a huge impact in the community. So, you know the drill. Let's get back to it.
It's some sense of significance. I'm significant because I have this problem and I'm in pain, so I want sympathy or empathy from others. Oh, you poor thing. You okay, love? Can I help you? So they're getting side benefits from having these issues and these problems sometimes. And sometimes they don't want to let them go. I've had people who've come for hypnotherapy for weight loss, and when push comes to shove, the reason they put on weight, there's one particular female years ago who had been sexually abused and been hit on inappropriately. She was quite an attractive, gorgeous blonde in her heyday. And I think she was still very attractive and beautiful, even though she was carrying a few extra kilos.
Yeah.
So I guess for her, processing that and losing the weight would mean she doesn't have that layer of protection anymore.
Oh, okay.
Because if she's overweight and she's not as attractive, people won't hit on her.
Oh, wow.
So it is amazing what you find out of the reasons why people are doing things that they don't even know themselves. So once we had to resolve the trauma and the thought patterns that she had around that and around herself and her protection in order for her to then get to that level of, okay, yeah, now I'm safe to lose the weight. I'm older. I know how to deal with people. I know how to shut people down if they're being inappropriate, and I can do that in a kind but confident way.
So for someone like you who's gone through your own personal journey of your own experiences and that, what was some of the biggest challenge that you faced?
Oh, okay. I've got one I can share. So when my ex-husband and I separated, he then moved on and married someone else, and they had a child, and my children's stepmother was being quite abusive and hard on them, and for whatever reason. So I found that very challenging, and back then I was doing martial arts and I was very, very fit, like had a six-pack and was, doing sparring and things like that. And to be honest with you, there was a part of me that wanted to get in my car and drive up there and go and see her and
Kick her ass?
shake her down and say, don't you treat my children like that, And as a mother, of course, the lioness comes out and you want to protect your children. So I grew up Catholic, and I met someone who was doing some meditation. She was a client that I was helping, and she was doing some meditation at a Buddhist monastery. And she said, I think you'd love this, you should come. She invited me along. So then for 2 years, every Monday night, I would go to their drop-in meditation sessions, and I would sometimes do their weekend retreats as well. And it had the most profound impact on me. What I found actually with the Catholic Church was you'd go to church and it was a lot of rote learning and the same prayers and the same kind of stuff, and then you might get, you know, a 20-minute sermon or whatever where you get some new information and something useful that would stimulate your mind.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'll keep that kind of thing.
So it's like the 80-20 rule. Have you heard about that? Like when you do a course or a training, 80% of it's fluff and 20% of it you might actually use.
Yes.
That's the way I think. I'm not saying that's right. That's just how I think about my experience of going to church every week. And then when I was doing the Buddhism on a very regular basis, what I found was it was the opposite. There was only about 20% of the time where we would recite a rote learned prayer, but the majority of the time, 80% of the time, we were engaged in doing a meditation, and it might be a guided meditation, or it might be one where you do a silent meditation where you're trying to just quieten your mind. And I found the guided ones were helpful initially until I learned how to meditate better and how to actually quiet my mind. And that's easier on some days than others, depending on what you've got going on. And we touched on topics at the Buddhist monastery, like obviously compassion and things like that. And it's all about, you know, solving human suffering. And a lot of the suffering we create in our mind with our thoughts. So I learned compassion for my children's stepmother. And I did walk in her shoes and got to understand a little bit what she was going through. And eventually it got to a point where she left physical marks on my daughter, and my daughter ran away from home. She went 7 k's through the paddocks in a country area, got hit by 2 electric fences and scared some cows. And you can imagine her nervous system, like when she bolted after her stepmother had got her down on the ground and attacked her and left these bruises on her, to then run. But she knew where to go. There was a lady that lived not far away who was a social worker, and she went to school with that lady's son. So she found a safe place and called me, and so then I was able to initiate a court case and get intervention orders against the stepmother and my ex for family violence. So that was an interesting process where...
Did that meditation stop you from...
It helped me so much.
From what you would have probably have done?
What I
differently?
Otherwise could have done.
Yeah.
If my raw impulses had have taken over.
I mean, like most parents, I think every mother would have probably gone the other pathway of like, all right, I'll sort this out once and for all.
And children are very resilient. You know, don't forget that this is their life lessons and things that they need to learn. And, you know, sometimes we get up in arms as a mother because someone else is not doing things the way that or there's something that's unfair. And at the end of the day, I used to remind myself, is this life-threatening? Is this going to kill them? No. Okay, well, they're relatively safe. Calm down. Because sometimes we start to get a bit triggered about the littlest things, and then we build up a big story about what a horrible person this other person is, and not helpful.
No. So wrong use of the energy, I suppose.
So when I went into that whole process of going to court, I was representing myself in court and stood up in front of the judge, which was really scary, and told him why I wanted intervention orders for family violence to protect my children. And then there's a few different cases before you get to what's called a contest. And right as we got almost through that whole process, the judge asked me if he could award legal aid to help me out. because I was doing this on behalf of my children, which I graciously accepted. And of all of the people that could have gotten assigned to my case in all of Melbourne, this lovely gentleman called Keith Bolton rang up. And so we discussed the case and I gave him some details and everything. And then right at the end of the call, he said, all right, well, that's probably wrapped it up. Thanks for that. I'll see you on the appointed date. And I said, Keith, before you go, are you related to the Boltons from Sale? Oh, yes, he said, Ken's my brother, and away he went. I said, well, your niece, Victoria Bolton, married my brother, Michael. Oh, he said, I was at that wedding. Were you there? I said, of course I was there. It's my brother. And I said, so you're going into bat for family? Well, he said, best I bring my A game.
Nice.
And I just thought, you know, when you take right action, the universe does reward you. Talk about synergy. Like, it was one of the most meaningful coincidences ever.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so it ended up being a great outcome, and we had to do a two-pronged approach. We had to then go and get the family court orders changed, and that actually gave the children a lot more choice. So what I did in that situation is I basically negotiated that if the children didn't want to go and see their father, they didn't have to. And similarly, if I mistreated them and they didn't want to come and see me, they didn't have to go. They were old enough, I don't know, sort of 15 odd, that they could make their own choice. So
that would have been challenging for them too as well, I suppose, with, you know, going back and forth. I want to go dad's, I want to go mum's, or, you know, and probably bickering between the kids too, like, no, let's go to dad's or let's go to mum's.
There were some times when my son would hide when I was scheduled to take the children to their father, and I wouldn't be able to find him because he knew it was nearly time to go. And then eventually it got to a situation where he refused to get out of the car, and my ex was saying, well, you know, come on, make him get out. And I said, you know what? No. If you can't get him out of the car and convince him to go, I'm actually not going to interfere with this, because this is as a result of your relationship with your son. And I'm not going to force him to go. And that was kind of, part of the whole process of, you know, these children have a right to choose where they feel safe and where they want to be. I sent him to live with his father a bit later on in his life because he was in need of a male role model, and at that stage he'd split up with the woman that had been abusive. But that was a bit of a different scenario. So, yeah.
Okay, with that being said then, what you've gone through, what you've experienced, the synergy, everything just aligning with what you were going through. Did you ever have any mentors or people that were important to you that helped you along the way through what you experienced?
I had a few. There was one in particular who was my NLP trainer, a guy called Murray Collier. And in doing that training, I got so much therapy in practicing the techniques on each other and that kind of thing. And then also I did hypnotherapy with Rick Collingwood. So he was an amazing mentor and teacher. I learned so much from him. He actually reminded me of my father in a few ways and in certain stages, and they were good little triggers to help me work through some things. So that was quite interesting too.
Wow, cool. Okay, so for someone that's probably going through their own... actually, before we even go there, throughout all the different stages of your life, did that ever impact your mental state? Like,
oh, absolutely.
To a point where... And how did you overcome it?
There was a time where I remember hitting rock bottom. There's been a few times. We all have ups and downs in life. This particular time I was at rock bottom. And it was probably midst when my children were being abused and just before I found the Buddhist monastery. And I was just so, just at a loss, destitute almost. Like, I didn't know what to do. I felt powerless. I felt helpless. Felt like a failure. Whole host of things. It was horrible. And one of the things that's helped me a lot always has been my fitness. So I reconnected with some people, started going to the gym and to boot camps and things like that, which I think getting movement into your body. And also I sat down and I worked out, okay, what is the problem? What has been my false solution to the problem? Dwelling on it was one, because you make it bigger. And what's the solution? And I had to sort of sit down, and a problem well defined is a problem half solved. If you can actually work out what the problem is and you can nutshell it and you can define it, that makes a big difference. And sometimes we don't even stop to think about that. So I found writing and solving problems and step by step, what can I do? And then I would sit down and go, right, what's inside of my control and what's outside of my control? It's outside of my control how someone treats my children. And it was hard picking them up and hearing them complain week after week after week after their visits. It was horrible.
Wow.
And I guess nutting that out. And I actually did also go to a counsellor. And to be honest with you, that was dreadful. There were sessions. I had 3 or 4 sessions with a counsellor, got on a mental health care plan, that kind of thing. And she wasn't really engaged. There were times when she would say, oh, I've got a bit of a cold, so, if I don't seem very with it, then, that's why. Another time she said, oh, I've just flown back in from New Zealand, so I'm not jet lagged, but I am a little bit, so if you feel like I'm not quite with you, I am, and I'm listening. And then another session she did, she said, oh, can I do some EFT tapping? I'm just learning it, and I thought, maybe it might be helpful. And I'm pretty open. So I said, yeah, you do whatever you like. And I don't know if she understood the process properly, because afterwards I did go and look into that, and I had a little bit of experience with it in the past. But it's like she tapped the problem in, not tapped it out. Ouch. I haven't cried so much in my life, I don't think, both in the session and then afterwards. So I cancelled that and went back to doing timeline therapy with somebody that I knew, and some hypnotherapy and the tools that for me I knew were effective. Sometimes with counselling, I find talking about a problem and going into the problem just creates the problem bigger. Unless you get to a point where there's some suggestions for some solutions or some kind of understanding that comes out of it. And you don't always get to that point. I was just feeling worse and worse and worse.
Wow.
So, yeah, at that time I was searching for solutions. But, yeah, fitness, writing things down, defining what the problems are, deciding what you can do about them and letting go of what's outside of your control. Those were ways that I was able to start to navigate through, and then to look at, okay, where do I need to go and get help?
Wow. Yeah, I think that's key.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We can't be our own counsellor. We can't be our own therapist. Sometimes you need an objective perspective and someone outside of yourself to lead you through.
Okay. Do you think that some of the massage therapists, maybe, I'm not trying to point them out as being, wrong in what they're doing, but do you think that some of them don't tend to do what they are there for? Like if you're seeing other clients who've come from someone else who does the same work, what is it do you think that they're missing out on, or probably not following through with?
Yeah, look, I think some therapists out there are not very congruent. they're in it for their own reasons. A good therapist in any modality, I believe, needs to be very genuine, a genuine desire to want to help people. You can tell if you go for a massage and it's just a job and they're watching the clock, or they're, and I see you go to the shopping centres, the chop shops in the shopping centre, and they've got one elbow on a client who's sitting there and they're texting on their phone with the other hand. Well, you're not giving that client your full attention and your energy and looking for the knots and really caring about whether you help them. It's just a job.
Wow.
And don't even get me started about the level of fraud that goes on in our industry. As a remedial massage therapist, and I was a teacher, some of my students used to go to some shopping centre places because they're a little bit renowned for it, not all, but some. And they would have a provider number that was being used communally, which is fraud. It's a federal crime, actually, to defraud the private health funds. So when you're getting a rebate for remedial massage, if you have to have a provider number. So if someone is a therapist that's just been taught in the clinic and a client comes in who wants a private health rebate, often they will match them up with the wrong therapist but just use someone else's provider number.
Okay, so that would be some of the behind the scenes of what's happening out there, unfortunately.
And unfortunately, what that does is it bastardizes our industry, because then the public don't actually understand what a good remedial massage treatment should feel like and how much it should help them, because they're just getting some generic Thai massage or whatever, which, a lot of therapies are really great, but they're not necessarily providing a remedy for the problem. And that's what remedial massage is all about. It's designed to help restore full range of motion and get rid of knots and tension and things like that.
Which can also lead to mental health, mental challenges.
100%. I mean, we're not operating at our best, are we? If we're full of trigger points in our shoulders and our back and it's referring pain and giving us headaches and things like that. Yeah. Or just that discomfort of that knife in the back feeling because you've got something that's going on in there.
Wow. Okay.
Even people with sore knees, sometimes it's just their muscles are so tight that it's causing pain. They might have a tight IT band that runs down the side of the leg into the lateral side of the knee, and they've got this sharp pain. And I do some cupping through that IT band and free it up, and it's like, oh, that's better.
Okay, cool. What would be a couple of things that you would like the viewers to take away from our chat today, and the benefits of why something like this could, help them potentially in their own mental and physical well-being?
Well, I think firstly, if you are going to seek help, try and make sure that that person is appropriately qualified, that you have a good connection with them. Even if you're on a mental health care plan and you go and see a therapist, if it's not working, just stop, find someone else. Make sure you get a good match. It's okay to shop around. And it's okay to ask people what their qualifications are to make sure that you're actually getting quality therapy. And also to not be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to put your hand up and go, you know what, I'm struggling with this. You'd be surprised how many people out there are willing to assist you. And it's a big thing for a lot of people, and particularly for males, that they don't like to ask for help and put their hand up and say, hey, you know what, I'm struggling here a bit.
I was thinking about that too, that I think a typical bloke might see something and go, nah, that's not for me. But then they
don't knock it till you try it.
But yet they miss out on the benefits of, loosening up those knots and then realizing like, oh.
And I think especially for men, seeking therapy can be like a sign of weakness. And I know a lot of like police officers and AMBOs and people like that can be quite resistant to it. And yet they're actually exposed to a lot of high level stuff that can create trauma and things like that. So it doesn't hurt to have a safe way to be able to process some things and, to be able to move through that so it doesn't linger with you. I know a lot of ex-service people that still have a lot of nightmares and things like that. And to me, all that means is those nightmares are there telling you that the subconscious mind is struggling to make sense of something. So it's about holding space for those people to actually get the learnings that they need, and then they won't have the nightmares anymore. Tons of my clients tell me that, my nightmares have gone. I'm having lovely dreams now.
Wow.
So that's pretty special too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay then, so any final thoughts?
I guess really it comes back to don't be afraid to put your hand up and ask for help if you need it, and seek out a good fit, a good therapist that you really click with, and look for someone that actually does have a genuine desire to help and that you can feel that good energy from.
Nice.
I think that's super important.
Nice. So before we wrap up, how can they get a hold of you and where?
So my website is www.accelerate.life, EXCELR and the number 8, so it's kind of like a number plate.
Nice.
And I guess if it's a podcast, they're welcome to contact you, and
yeah, cool.
I'll be happy for you.
And all the other socials are on your website as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll also add those links in the description down below. So
yeah, fabulous.
Debra, thank you for joining me at the round table. Really appreciate this moment. So
thank you so much. It's been amazing.